She healed the dying Alpha King. By dawn, 100 wolves surrounded her home. They said the Alpha King had 3 days to live. I gave him 3 hours to decide if he wanted my help or his pride. When he finally crawled to my doorstep, bleeding silver and choking on his own arrogance, I almost let him die just to prove a point. But I'm not cruel. I'm just tired of powerful men who only remember my name when they're dying. My name is Sarah Whitlock, and I'm the healer every pack calls when their medicine fails and their prayers go unanswered. I live alone in a cabin at the edge of the Shadow Pine territory, far enough from pack politics to sleep at night, close enough to hear the howls when someone's time is running out. I'm not a wolf, I'm human, and that's precisely why they hate needing me. The night the Alpha King came to die on my porch, I was grinding valerian root for a tincture, my hands stained purple, my hair tied back with a strip of old linen. The knock came just after midnight. 3 heavy thuds that shook the entire doorframe. I knew what it meant. Someone important was dying, and they'd exhausted every other option before remembering the human woman who lived among the herbs and bones. I opened the door to find him there, Darius Blackthorn, the Alpha King himself. 6 feet 4 inches of raw dominance reduced to a trembling mess, his skin gray as ash, black veins spreading like cracks across his throat and chest. 2 of his warriors flanked him, their eyes wild with desperation and rage, the kind of rage that comes from watching your king die and being powerless to stop it. Silver poisoning, I could smell it from 10 feet away. Someone had laced his drink with liquid silver at the treaty summit, an assassination attempt that should have killed him in minutes, but his pure alpha bloodline was buying him time. Not much. Maybe till dawn if he was lucky. I stepped aside without a word. They carried him in and laid him on my workbench, scattering my carefully organized jars of foxglove and nightshade. One of the warriors, a blonde brute named Cade, grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise. "Tell me you can save him." I looked at Darius, at the way his chest barely rose and fell, at the silver burning through his veins like acid. Then I looked back at Cade. "Get your hand off me, or I let him die just to watch you weep." He released me. They always do, because they know I'm the last option, and last options don't negotiate. I sent them outside. Healing requires silence, concentration, and absolutely no hovering alphas questioning every move I make. They resisted, of course. Alphas always resist being told what to do, especially by humans, especially by human women. But when Darius coughed up black blood onto my floor, they left. The first thing I did was burn sage and sweetgrass, filling the cabin with smoke thick enough to choke on. Silver poisoning isn't just physical. It corrupts the bond between wolf and human, severs the connection to the pack mind, leaves the victim isolated in their own dying body. The smoke helps guide the wolf spirit back, gives it something to anchor to besides the pain. Then I stripped him down to nothing. Modesty has no place in my work. I needed to see every inch of corrupted flesh, every black vein, every place the silver had nested and started to calcinate his organs. His body was a horror show. Muscles that should have been carved from stone were soft and failing. Skin that should have been burning hot with alpha fire was cold as a corpse. I started with a tourniquet just below his heart, using consecrated rope soaked in wolfsbane tea. It sounds counterintuitive, using poison to fight poison, but wolfsbane slows the heartbeat, which slows the spread of silver through the bloodstream. It bought me time. Next came the extraction. I took my silver knife, the one I use for cutting roots and slicing through infected tissue, and I made 7 incisions along his major meridian lines. The blood that poured out was thick and black, more tar than liquid. I caught it in a bowl, chanting the old words my grandmother taught me. The ones that don't come from any wolf tradition, but from something older, something that existed before packs and territories and alpha kings. He woke up screaming during the 3rd incision. His eyes, usually cold amber, were completely black. He tried to shift, tried to call his wolf forward to heal him, but the silver had caged the beast. All that came out was a strangled howl that sounded more like a dying dog than a king. I held him down with one hand on his chest. For a human woman barely 5'6", I have a surprisingly strong grip. Years of hauling water and chopping wood will do that. If you shift right now, you'll die. The silver will shred your wolf form from the inside out. So lie still and let me work, or I'll tie you down and finish this while you scream. He stared at me with those black eyes, and for a moment, I thought he might actually be stupid enough to fight me. But then something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or respect. He went still. The extraction took 2 hours. 2 hours of draining poison blood, packing the wounds with poultices made from crushed emerald ash bark and ground moonstone, forcing him to drink tea so bitter it made him gag. 2 hours of chanting and smoking and bleeding, my hands moving on instinct and muscle memory, barely thinking, just doing what needed to be done. By the time I finished the final binding, wrapping his torso in strips of cloth soaked in sanctified spring water, the sky outside was starting to gray with pre-dawn light. His skin had gone from ash gray to merely pale. The black veins were fading, retreating back toward his heart where I could manage them with daily treatments. His breathing was deeper, steadier. He'd live. I washed my hands in the basin, watching his blood swirl pink in the water. I was exhausted, bone deep, soul tired, exhausted. This kind of healing takes something from you every time. A piece of your own life force traded for theirs. It's why I don't do it often. It's why I charge what I charge. I turned to tell him he'd need to stay for observation, that the next 48 hours were critical, that moving him could restart the poisoning. But he was already sitting up, already pulling on his shredded pants, already returning to the role of Alpha King who bows to no one and needs nothing. You should rest. I don't take orders from humans. His voice was ragged, shredded from the screaming, but the arrogance was fully intact. Of course it was. I'd just saved his life. And his first instinct was to remind me of my place in his hierarchy. Then die on your way home. I don't particularly care. I moved to open the door, to let his warriors back in, to be done with this ungrateful bastard and his toxic masculinity. But his hand shot out and caught my wrist. Not hard like Cade had. Gentle, almost tentative. How much do I owe you? I looked at where his hand circled my wrist, at the way his thumb rested against my pulse point, at the strange intimacy of the gesture. Your life. You owe me your life, Darius Blackthorn. And before you tell me you can pay in gold or territory or political favors, understand that I don't want any of those things. I want you to remember that a human woman saved the great Alpha King when all his wolves and all his power couldn't. I want you to remember that the next time you're deciding which beings matter and which don't. I pulled my hand free and opened the door. His warriors rushed in, their relief palpable, their questions coming in rapid fire. I ignored them all. I walked outside onto my porch and breathed in the dawn air, cold and clean, untainted by blood and silver and pride. That's when I saw them. Wolves, dozens of them, maybe 100, maybe more, forming a perfect circle around my cabin, their eyes glowing in the half-light. Every rank, every age, warriors and elders and juveniles barely old enough to hold their shift. They sat in absolute silence, watching, waiting. Cade came out behind me, following my gaze. When he saw the gathering, he actually gasped. It's the vigil. When an Alpha King comes close to death, the entire kingdom holds vigil until he wakes. They've been arriving all night, tracking his scent here. They know what you did. They know you saved him. I stared at the sea of wolves, at the way they looked at me, not with gratitude exactly, but with something else. Recognition, acknowledgement, the human healer who held their king's life in her hands and gave it back. Darius appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, still too weak to stand unassisted, but too stubborn to stay down. He looked at his wolves, at the vigil they'd kept, and something in his expression cracked, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see the man underneath the crown. He raised one hand, a gesture of acknowledgement, of I'm alive, of return to your homes. The wolves began to disperse, melting back into the forest in twos and threes. Their duty complete, but one remained, a massive black wolf, bigger than the others, with eyes that burned like molten gold. It stared directly at me, head cocked, assessing. Then it did something I'd never seen a wolf do. It bowed, a full, formal bow, head to the ground, submission and respect in one gesture. That's my father, the former Alpha King. Darius's voice was quiet, almost awed. I watched as the black wolf rose, turned, and vanished into the trees, a king bowing to a human. The whole world had gone mad. You should go. Before your council realizes you came to me instead of your pack healers, before they start asking questions about why the human worked when their magic failed. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with those amber eyes that were slowly returning to their normal color. I'll be back. For the follow-up treatments you mentioned, I didn't mention follow-up treatments. You were going to. Before, I was an ass about taking orders. So I'm telling you now, I'll be back, every day, if needed, because apparently I need you, Sarah Whitlock. And I'm trying very hard to be less of a bastard about admitting it. I almost smiled. Almost. Dawn visits only. I have other patients who actually respect me. And if you're late, I start without you, which means you get the treatments cold instead of properly warmed, and trust me, you don't want that." He did smile then. Just a slight quirk of his lips, but it transformed his entire face. Made him look younger, less burdened, almost human. Dawn it is. He left with his warriors, moving slow but steady, his spine straight despite the pain I knew he was in. I watched them disappear into the forest, the same forest that had been ringed with 100 wolves just minutes before. I went back inside and started cleaning. Blood on the floors, blood on my workbench, blood under my fingernails that would take days to fully wash away. The cabin smelled like death and smoke and the strange ozone scent that alpha wolves leave behind when they've been close to the edge and pulled back. As I worked, I thought about the way he'd looked at me, the way his father had bowed, the way 100 wolves had surrounded my home, not as a threat, but as a vigil, as a thank you. I'd healed the Alpha King, and something told me that nothing in my quiet, solitary life was ever going to be simple again. 3 days later, he came back. Dawn, exactly as I'd specified. He knocked this time, polite and almost gentle. I let him in and saw that the black veins had receded completely. His color was back. His strength was returning. He'd live a long life now, barring another assassination attempt. I prepared the follow-up treatment in silence, mixing herbs and grinding minerals, aware of him watching my every move. When I finally turned to apply the poultice to his chest, he caught my hand again. "Why do you live out here alone? A healer of your skill could name her price in any pack. You could live in luxury, protected and honored. I could, but then I'd belong to someone. I'd owe loyalty to a pack, to an alpha, to a hierarchy that would eventually ask me to choose who lives and who dies based on politics instead of need. Out here I answer to no one. I heal who I choose. I turn away who I choose. I'm free. Even if that freedom is lonely, even then." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand still holding mine, his thumb tracing small circles on my wrist. "What if you didn't have to choose? What if you could have protection without ownership? Freedom within connection?" I pulled my hand away and applied the poultice more roughly than necessary, making him wince. "Alpha Kings don't make offers like that. They make demands dressed up as offers." "So say what you really mean, Darius. You want me bound to your pack, available whenever you need healing, loyal to your crown. Just admit it." "That's not what I want." "Then what do you want?" "You. I want you. Not as a pack healer or a political asset or a tool to be used. Just you. The woman who threatened to let me die to prove a point. The woman who wasn't afraid of me even when I was at my most dangerous. The woman who lives alone in the woods and doesn't apologize for it." The cabin went very, very quiet. Outside, birds were starting their morning songs. Inside, my heart was doing something complicated and inconvenient. I don't date alphas. As a rule, you're too possessive, too controlling, too convinced that everything exists to serve your needs. I've watched too many human women disappear into that dynamic and lose themselves completely. I'm not asking you to disappear. I'm asking you to be seen. Really seen. Not as the healer or the human or the woman on the edge of society. As Sarah. Just Sarah. He stood, wincing slightly as his still healing muscles protested. He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll keep coming for treatments until you tell me to stop. Not because I need them anymore, but because these dawn visits are the only time I get to be something other than a king. With you, I'm just a man who almost died and learned that maybe being invincible isn't as important as being human." He left. I stood in my cabin, surrounded by herbs and silence, my hands shaking slightly, my carefully constructed walls showing their first cracks. The Alpha King had come to my door dying, and I'd saved him. But standing there in the gray morning light, I had the distinct feeling that somehow, without meaning to, he'd started saving me too. And that terrified me more than any silver poisoning ever could.